All right, cool. Joined here by Tim Harstead of Chicago Style Management. So it's about to be a really, really bad joke, but it's like property management, but with mustard, no ketchup, dipped in au jus, and with a side of Malort. That's the kind of property management that you're gonna get with Tim Harstead. So Tim, hey, how's it going, man? Good to see you.
What's going on, man? Nice to see you.
So people who know me at all will probably know that I'm the very numbers driven. I'm an analytical person, and I'm very just kind of like here's what the numbers say on paper of what this place should do, just based on comps and whatever, however I go about certain things. But very rarely do I get the opportunity to really go down the road of the actual boots on the ground, the stuff you have to do with your hands. I think a lot of the multi-family space is just all it's like a little more ethereal pie in the sky. You can build wealth and passive income, like that's passive income and all these kinds of things. But it does take some work, and there's stress involved, and there's all kinds of stuff. And I figured no one better to share what people should be expecting to get into a reality check situation from the guy that is doing it literally 24/7. So that's the idea here. So just to
Yeah,
get into it right away, whether you're doing it on your own or having someone like Tim do it for you, what would you say is like the 10,000 foot overview of the scope of what property management entails?
yeah. I think it's so. First of all, it's funny because IRS classifies it as passive income, right? So that's where
Hmm.
everyone hears that it's passive. And if you hire the right property manager, it can be. And we can get into that later. But that's really you got two options, and just with anything, right? When you're starting off as an entrepreneur in any field, there's sweat equity. You're going to do the work, and you're not going to pay a whole lot. And then there's actual equity. I have extra money. I'm going to spend it so I can go and do better things with my time that can make more money or make me happier if it's spending family time or whatever, right? So if you're hiring a property manager, your goal should be to make it as passive as possible. If not, it's really, it's funny because they say like that. It's always whatever you don't expect to happen happens. So if you only have one property, like a house or a two flat, you're probably not putting a whole lot of hours per se into it on a weekly basis until you start to build up and have more and more properties. But I guarantee you that time when the flood happens or when the calls start coming in or the things on fire, literally, they're just things that we get calls are. It's always at the worst time. It's gonna be when you're out at a party or with your family somewhere on vacation or 2 a.m. in the morning, things like that. So it's really a 24/7 job that you're on call, right? You may not be working 24/7, but you're on call 24/7. So I think that's the part that a lot of people don't realize is that there are going to be times when you get calls in the middle of the night or you can't really predict when you're going to have to do maintenance things. And then the other part of it is and I know you said you're a numbers guy, right? I think a lot of people don't pay enough attention to their numbers without a property manager, recording everything, every dime that they spend, the hours of labor and things like that. And so when you're not recording those, you're missing one of the huge, I think there's 5 ways you're making money in real estate, and one of them is tax savings. And if you're not recording everything properly, you're going to miss a huge portion of that, and which is really a huge benefit when you're running real estate.
What are the other four? What are your 5 ways of making money with real
So
estate?
it's yeah. So cash flow is the one that everyone
Yeah.
talks about. However, in today's market, cash flow is very hard. If you're buying a property, odds are you're only cash flowing a little bit with the way the market is and the interest rates and all that stuff. And it was really never meant to be. We got very spoiled in like the late 2000 teens with being able to buy property at a 2% interest rate. The world was
Hmm.
never supposed to be there. But beyond that, we have tax savings is a huge way of making money. So if you're active in real estate, you can actually take that real estate loss from depreciation and write that off on your taxes toward and offset your W-2. So that's a huge one, as well as just anything you're spending, things like that. So those two, three is going to be appreciation, natural, right? So if you buy a house and do nothing to it for 10 years, you are probably still gonna almost double in value in that time period. And then there's forced appreciation, which is actually going in there and doing work at a cheaper dollar amount than what someone will pay for it. So putting a new roof on, remodeling the property. If you bought it for 100,000, you put 50 in, now you can sell it for 200. So that's the fourth way. And why am I blanking on the fifth, of course? Tax savings, appreciation, forced appreciation, cash flow. I'm why I'm blanking on it. I'll send you to my website to the blog.
No, that's
Which
okay.
one?
I'm trying to think of
Um,
what a fifth one would be too. Those four are definitely the ones I can think of.
but
I'm sure, yeah,
it'll come to me at
we'll
some
think
point.
of it.
We'll leave it
Yeah, and
there.
it's
But
you'll be like, oh
the
yeah, of
tax one,
course. Hmm.
yeah, tax one people don't take advantage of that. And on top of that is the just people don't realize that the appreciation is coming through.
Yes, go ahead and brag on Chicago style management for a second. How is Chicago style management different than some of your the other folks out there doing the same thing?
Yeah, so the biggest thing is that we operate in C and D class areas, and unfortunately, a lot of these areas are just underserviced. So there are a lot of property managers you can find that will do the south side of Chicago, west side of Chicago, all of that. But I was telling you earlier before we took on, we just took over property management for 34 units, and everything was on paper. Which, if you were in Lincoln Park, you would never accept that your management doesn't have a login and doesn't have a way to see everything. So being able to see everything on a website, being able to access it 24/7, having different ways for tenants to pay rent and to put in work order requests and things like that. Just being more of a technologically advanced and bringing the quality of management that you see in the higher end neighborhoods to the south side of Chicago is really what we're all about.
Hmm. Just bringing a level of professionalism to areas that also deserve to have that level of professionalism.
Absolutely, exactly. And I think
Hmm.
it's just a super underserved area, and being able to see that and help these homes out and make them look nice again and rehab them and everything and help them with the rehabs and getting the neighborhoods up is awesome.
Hmm. You mentioned the C and D properties. So for anyone, I'm planning on doing some videos around this and explaining what this kind of stuff means, just from my opinion on it. But I guess from your point of view, somebody who might not, who that language might be foreign to them, like the A, B, C, D class properties or areas or things like that. How do you think about like those differentiations?
Yeah, so we could go A to F when we're rating something, and the way to look at it is towards the top of the alphabet. A class properties are going to be way more expensive, but
Hmm.
they're going to be less risk, less reward, meaning that the
Yeah.
odds of you having the building fall apart and have to do $100,000 repair is very low. The odds of not being able to find good tenants that pay is very low. But you're probably, because of the higher price you're paying, you're probably cash flowing at top maybe 8-10%, right? When you get down to C and D, there's going to be periods where you're probably not cash flowing at all, and you're taking money out of your pocket to fix something or to wait a year as you're trying to evict a tenant, things like that. But if everything goes right and when everything goes right, you're probably cash flowing 20-30% because you're buying a unit for 40 or 50 grand versus 150. And the rents sometimes are comparable. The difference being that the type of tenants that you're going to find and the type of homes that you're going to find are going to need a lot more work and are going to need to have some issues with paying on time and things like that.
Hmm. Yeah. Do you think of it more in terms like letter grades assigned to the properties themselves or to the areas or just like a mix of both?
I think the area, it's to the areas in the sense of realistically, the areas get when you have a property, when you have an area where all the properties are 150 years old and not taken care of well, now the types of renters that you're finding to move in there are going to be less likely to have hiring jobs and A plus credit, right? Because
Hmm.
if you were making 250 or 300 grand a year, you're probably going to move to Lincoln Park or something like that if you're in Chicago. Whereas when you're making 20 or 30 grand, you can't afford those. So you're moving to areas like Inglewood and things like that. So the letter grade is based on the area, but I think the areas turn into what they are because of the types of properties you can buy. You're not getting
Mm.
too many new builds in the middle of Inglewood.
Right. Yeah.
Hmm.
That makes sense. Okay. Yeah, I think of it in terms of like the bond market, like how there's like an
Mhm.
inverse relationship between the price of a bond and the yield of a bond. So think of like the
Yep.
safest possible bond, like a treasury bill or something like that, or something like that. Like it's like the safest possible thing because it's backed by the government, and at least so far, the U.S. government has not defaulted on any bonds or anything like that. So it's like those are going to be the kind of the highest price but the lowest yield that you're going to find on the market versus some kind of like corporate junk bond that is going to potentially
Mhm.
pay a much higher yield. The price is going to be lower though because they're expecting more yield because of the higher amount of risk that they're taking on and things like that. So,
Yep. Exactly.
yeah. That all makes sense. From a housing provider, which is a fancy industry word for landlord, the more syllables you say, the better anything sounds. That's just a rule of life, I think. But from a housing provider standpoint, what would you say are the main differences in what to expect when you are looking at different area classes, property classes, things like that throughout the city or just in general?
Yeah, again, so I mean, you're going to pay more for A class, and the initial investment is going to be much higher for an A class than a C class or a D class. Now, with that being said, when you buy somewhere in an A class property and you're buying something that's already ready to go, you can probably safely budget 10%, 20% to repairs and things like that into vacancy, which is not that high. When you're on somewhere with C and D class, you're probably going to be closer to 40 or 50% in repair costs compared to the rent coming in, just because a lot of these buildings here still have cloth wires, still have the old lead pipes, things like that. So when something goes wrong, that would be an easy fix in a newer property. All of a sudden, you're going into a wall and redoing pipe or redoing electric, or it becomes a bigger issue quicker. And then the last part of that is obviously your delinquency and your eviction rate is going to be much higher when you're renting to people with lower credit scores. The odds are they're going to be late every once in a while, and that you might have to evict a certain percent of them and lose 8 or 10 months of rent. Whereas if you're doing things correctly on an A class property and screening, realistically, you should never really have to evict anyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Does the vacancy rate of an area factor into that calculus, or not really? Because just if you're doing it right, it shouldn't have that much vacancy anyway. Or is it more eviction rate or vacancy
I
rate?
think
That would be.
it's both. You're looking at, and I would say between like A and C plus, there's probably not that much variance in vacancy. But when you start getting down to like the neighborhoods that have just like when you drive by and there's just boarded up houses everywhere, and that's where what we consider D and F class areas, and boarded up houses everywhere, gang members walking the streets, things like that. It's going to be a lot harder to rent it because you got to find someone that's willing to live there. So it affects showings and things like that. So when you get down to D class properties and worse, sometimes C minus vacancy is definitely higher. What think about it. I found my answer from the previous one, the fifth one.
The fifth one. Let's go. What is it?
It's leverage with your mortgage. So paying down your mortgage as the comes in, pays your mortgage down when you go to sell it. That money all becomes profit. So
principal buy down, of course.
Yep.
Yes. That's a big one. That's a huge deal.
Yeah,
and it's the one that's guaranteed to. Go ahead.
You're just saying the loan's guaranteed to happen. Obviously, as long as you're not getting foreclosed on, but it's also one that I think people have a home, an investment property for 3 or 4 years that they forget about, and they say, "Oh, I'm only cash flowing this amount," but they're not adding it in to realize how much money they're making.
Yeah. No, this is something that I try to preach to my clients all the time, or just anybody who will listen. Is cash flow is nice, but it's not the whole thing. It's in fact, it's just like a cherry on top. Like it's the equity that you're building over time. That's what's really contributing to your actual financial health and wealth and situation and all that kind of stuff. Like that's the real game. The cash flow is a side quest.
Yeah, it is. And here's the other hidden truth, or whatever you want to call it, myth about real estate with the cash flow. People that are telling you that they're cash flowing $1,000 a month on a 2-flat or a 3-flat. There's a lot. Unfortunately, I think YouTube real estate investing has become a thing where you see, oh no, I should be making this or that. There's a big issue with that. They're taking that money in, but they're not putting any away into reserves, and they're not. All of a sudden, in 2 years, they have a $40,000 roof to replace, and majority of that cash flow gets erased. So you need cash flow to be able to put away for those big items that you're going to have. And I think a lot of people that are looking at just short term, 1 year, and I did really good this year, aren't properly prepared for when that big thing happens.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Because I'm just thinking of my kind of go-to like analysis calculator. Every property I've ever analyzed would look great if I set maintenance and capex to 0, but I don't do that. I put at least 5% in there for both of those, and then something for property management and all that. So yeah. And apparently, according to you, that might not even be enough. So yeah, that is what I wanted to circle back to. So you were saying this is going to vary for property class or area classes and all that kind of stuff, but you were saying for some areas, say just for sake of easy numbers, you had 10,000 a month coming in, which was probably high, but you had 10,000 a month coming in a C or D class property. You would recommend up to 40% of that being saved each month for capex and maintenance and vacancy?
Yeah, I would. And I don't get the same for vacancies and stuff like that, but I do think that and here's the cool, and here's the other part of it though, right? You're buying let's say something at 50 or 60,000 a unit, but you're getting 1,500 for rent. So the risk is baked in as well. But
Yeah.
so you're getting higher ratio rent versus what you paid for to begin with. So it makes sense that the ratio you're going to pay on maintenance is going to be more. Otherwise, no one would sell it for that low. But yeah, I would say about 40. And when I run numbers, just like you, like, and I think we're on the same page with the A class, 5 and 5, right around 10% or so is what I was saying. And C and D, I would say close to 40, just to be on the safe side. Like I said, when something small goes wrong in a lot of these really old buildings, it turns into something $5,000, $6,000 issue. We just had to dig up another pipe underground because the roots came in and busted the pipe and it's backflowing into a basement. But it wasn't just a simple jet. Now we have to go and do concrete and dig and fix a pipe just because of a lot of older material.
Yeah. And I'm sure obviously there's an element of that being a case by case basis, right? It's possible to find a building in a D area, like a B building in a D area, someplace, one of the few that people actually did maintain pretty well and take care of, or is somewhat newer somehow, or am I wrong?
Absolutely, but I would never tell the seller that.
Yeah.
If I'm buying, I'm running my numbers as worst case, but you never know.
Oh yeah.
And I then get it for a discount or look, no one's ever gonna be mad at us if in 10 years they made more money than we told them they would.
Yeah.
So
yeah, no doubt. What are some common mistakes that you see housing providers out there making when trying to manage their own properties?
the biggest one is, and this is not just with managing own properties, but us taking over for other managers as well, but tripping over dollars to try to save a dime, I think is the phrase. Fix something the right way the first time and be done with it for the next 20 years. A lot of people will try to put duct tape on something, or they'll hire a contractor that isn't really a contractor. It's just someone that runs electric commercial. Oh no, I think I know how to do it. And they put something through and now you have a bigger issue. So getting things done right the first time, spending a little extra money to make sure that it's going to last. That'd be probably the biggest one. And then the second one is getting an inspection before buying. We've had people call us, say, I just closed, come look at blah, blah, blah. We've had it both ways. One where the entire building needed tens of thousands of dollars of work that they didn't realize. Or B, even worse, because a lot of out-of-state buyers will buy and never look at the property and never have an inspection. They thought they had 20 units all occupied, rent being paid, and the building was completely empty. So making sure that someone is seeing the building, that you're getting a third opinion about the building, and that's going to cash flow, that there's not major repairs that are needed right away.
The thought of buying a multifamily building without doing an inspection, really buying any home at all, I don't even new construction condo in Lincoln Park, like anything, but especially a multifamily that's any older, that just makes me nauseous a little bit. Why would anybody do that? So, okay, so those were common mistakes. Okay, so in terms of, right, not putting the right amount of investment dollars down when something comes up, or just not going about thinking about that kind of stuff in the right kind of way. What about things like screening for tenants or even advertising your listings and just pitfalls and things to look for in that area?
Yeah, I mean, I think advertising, it's just get it on as many websites as you can, right? At this point, like there really isn't a skill that like there used to be to advertising rentals, importantly for these things, but it's just get your number out there and get it on as many websites as possible. But the real money's made in screening. So hey, don't waste your time pre-screening. Make sure you're pre-screening so you're not wasting your time, right? When you're getting 100 calls on your rental, don't have them all. Don't make 100 appointments. Either batch group them and have as many people walk through at once, or make sure you're pre-screening and talking to each of them to make sure they're ones that you're going to want. A couple and I say this in the sense of like it could go wrong because legally you could fall into some trouble and then you're screwed that way. So one of the things I think that legally wise people need to make sure they're watching out for is fair housing. You got to make sure that the biggest one, of course, now is subsidy, Section 8 and subsidy programs. So income is now part of fair housing, where your income's coming from. So I think a lot of people make the mistake of not accepting Section 8 or saying they're not going to accept Section 8, and that can lead you into a lot of hot water. So that's part one. But then in terms of actually screening, I think just making sure you have something set up to be on the lookout for fraud, because there are a ton of fake pay stubs out there and things like that. And then just setting your standards and sticking to them. I think a lot of people get very antsy and they've been waiting 2 weeks for someone to apply, and someone applies and they accept them right away. when they weren't the right tenant because they're afraid of losing another 2 weeks of rent. It is much better to sit vacant for 5 weeks instead of 2, versus having to go through an eviction and not have rent for 10 months. So
Yeah.
take your time, make sure you get the right tenants in there once you have those guidelines set.
Mm-hmm. Man, that's a good point about the fraud with all kinds of different fraud schemes out there. But yeah, the pay stubs one, I was shocked. So actually, I was a part of a there's some coaching program on how to get business funding and credit and stuff like that. And I was in some forums and stuff, and people giving other people advice and stuff like that. And a lot of the advice that people were giving in these forums was literally doing that. Like just, it's unreal how easy it is to just go to some template maker and just make a pay stub that looks super legit. You can make a phone number, make up a company, make up a phone number for that company. You can go down the road, but all this stuff would probably take you, like, if you're even somewhat tech savvy, it'd probably take you 15 minutes to do this stuff. And you're just like, you're off to the races, and you would not know unless you are like super savvy and do this kind of stuff for a living. Like, yeah, it's pretty wild.
Off topic, but on topic, just a fair warning to all your clients, something that we're seeing recently, luckily not with us, but with outside companies. The government, if you remember in 2020 and 2021, there's a whole bunch of subsidies going to tenants that weren't able to make their rent and all that through the CARES Act. They are now going back and looking for fraud and going to the landlord and saying, hey, you owe us 20 grand or you owe us 50 grand because we paid this, and the pay stubs from your tenants saying they weren't working was falsified. We have this, or we have that, or we can show that no one actually lived there, blah, blah, blah. And they're coming back and hitting people with $20,000, $40,000, $50,000 bills saying this needs to be repaid ASAP. So just a heads up there with fraud. It's coming back.
And they're coming after the landlords for that, not the tenants who actually did the fraud.
Yes. Yep, because of course the government makes sense. So yeah, it's all going on the landlords.
All right.
So if you sign and didn't verify, be on the lookout for some mail.
Man, oh man. Yeah. It's good. That's a good note. So we talked about saving for repairs, making the repairs, basically just making sure you're getting quality bonded contractors. I don't know. I may bonded, not bonded. I don't know. I don't know if you have a preference there. I guess bonded, if whatever. I don't know.
Bonded's a thing. So bonded's a thing in suburbs. It's not in Chicago. So that's Chicago. You don't need a bond to hang your GC license or to register your GC license or your license in Chicago. But most suburbs will make you pay for a bond. So,
okay. And your city, your suburbs, you guys are pretty much everywhere, right?
Yep. Yeah. We go all the way. We go as far north to Evanston, as far south to Sauk Village, and then west to like Bourbon Cicero area.
Gotcha. Oh yeah, and when you were talking about some of the things that differentiate you have a bit of a different price model, too, right?
Yeah. So we are.
I don't see.
Yeah. So we're actually a flat fee. So most property management companies they'll quote you 5% or 10% or 8% of the rent collected. This really, it's more of a marketing thing than anything. So I'll give away the secret of why we do it. But the South Side is so diverse. We have Hyde Park with $4,000 rentals in Bronzeville. And then less than a mile away, we have $800 rentals. So when we get people asking us about pricing, it was very annoying to be like, tell me about your property. What's the rent roll? What's all that? And that's what a lot of property management companies will do, because they have no idea what percent they're going to give you until they calculate your rent roll and figure out what's going to get them enough money. And we just really realized that for $100 a month, we charge $99 per unit. So we figure right around $100 a month. At that point, we can cover everything and manage everything. It's just $1,000, it's 10%, but if it's for $2,000, it's only 5%, which is down par with everyone else in those areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love the transparency of it, and like taking all the guesswork out of it, because that's actually how I found out that you do this now, because we talked about this before I started hitting record, but me and Tim are colleagues from the same brokerage years ago, and then kind of lost track of each other. And I was looking for property management companies out there to recommend to some of my clients, or to at least have some knowledge of what's out there, so I can at least intelligently talk about the options with people out there. And I came across this one and saw that, okay, this is actually cool. Like it's a flat fee, and you still charge for placing the tenants and things like that. So I'm guessing that's probably where most of your revenue is probably coming from and whatever. But yeah, I liked that, because no other property management website is, nobody's anywhere near that transparent. You got to call them, you got to talk to them about, explain exactly what you're talking about, like what's the rent roll going to be, all this kind of stuff. And then maybe we'll get back to you in a week with a couple quotes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I was just like, man, screw all that. Like, I'm just gonna recommend this. And then I looked a little deeper. I was like, oh man, it's Tim. I know this guy.
Yeah.
Awesome. So yeah.
Chicago's so like, and a lot of it is race based, which is sad, but like Chicago is such a unique area. If you go to California, right, and companies, you model after other businesses, and most of the country with property management, you're only working A class areas or you're only working B class areas or whatever. Chicago is so different because you can live, especially on the south side, within 5 blocks. You can go from mansion to homeless people to middle class, all within a short walk. So
Yep.
you don't see that a lot, but it makes it a lot harder to be like, okay, we're going to be the company for this price point. Whereas in other states, you can do, all right, we're the company for Hollywood Hills, and we know everything's going to rent for 20 grand. Or we're the company for Inglewood, and we know everything's 800. It's hard to do that in Chicago. So you just get a lot of questions, and like you said, a lot of lack of transparency with a lot of other companies.
Yeah. Love transparency. We mentioned evictions a little bit. I know that's the E word is the big boogeyman, I think, for a lot of people who are thinking about getting into real estate, and understandably so. Like it sounds awful. So yeah, I guess to speak a little bit to the eviction process, how common they are. Obviously that depends on the area and lots of different things, but just wax poetic on evictions for a second.
It's going to depend on the area, foremost, but then on top of that, it's going to depend on the screening. If a tenant is screened well, you're less likely to have to evict them or have to take those actions. So that really something that we pride ourselves on, again, making sure we're not putting the wrong tenants in. But with that, it's in Chicago, it's a long process. If you can't negotiate them out and do cash for keys or figure out a way to do it without court, you're looking at a minimum of about 6 months, and it could go to about 10 months, depending on the time cycle and when the court actually orders it. If you're in the middle of winter, now you got to wait 2 months before the sheriff comes out. So it can extend, easily into 10 months, and you can't accept rent during that time. You can't accept partial payments or anything, or otherwise you have to start all over. So it's 10 months of no money coming in. So it's something that you need to, going back to what we were talking about earlier about reserves and having money put aside, you have to be ready for that to be able to really take on a year of rent without getting payment in case something like that happens.
Mm-hmm. And then even when the eviction process is over, what percentage of the time would you say that the family being or the tenants being evicted leave the property broom clean with a fresh coat of paint and sparkly clean? Probably not very often. You're probably going to be going in there and
I would have said 0 up until like about 2 months ago. We got one. So one.
Oh, really?
1 out of 200.
Okay.
And we have no idea what happened there, but yeah, that was like the only one that was broom clean and actually like well taken care of. Most of the time we have to generally pay a couple of grand to get everything taken out and disposed of after they don't come back for it.
If you ever go on like Bigger Pockets forums where people are comparing like different cities to each other or different markets, so you hear a lot of, I think a lot of the scuttlebutt about Chicago is like that's a tenant friendly city. You don't want to start investing there. When people say that, do you see that, or like what do you think that really means to be? Is it just like the eviction rules, or
it's the eviction rules, and then it's the capping of late charges, the eviction rules. If we were to invest in Texas and someone doesn't pay, the sheriff's out within 30 days. So if you're not, and unfortunately the issue that it creates is it's quote unquote a tenant friendly town, but it forces landlords to be very untenant friendly, right? I can't give anyone a chance. If someone had just got divorced so their credit's low, I can't take that chance on them, because if it goes wrong, I'm out 10 months. Whereas if I was in a more landlord friendly state, you might be able to take that risk because you have to worry about that. It's also something that, again, going back into consequences that you're not really thinking about when you put in these laws. All the risk is priced in. These homes are, again, we're buying 50 grand and we're renting them out for 1,500. That equation shouldn't work, but because of the risk and because of the fact that over a 5-year period, you're probably going to have to go 4 or 5 months without rent. At some point, it gets baked in and you have to charge more. So it really does, unfortunately, hurt the tenants more than it helps them. But the eviction process is the biggest one. Laws surrounding in Chicago taking the security, it's to the point where it's legal, but it's close enough to so many rules that it's not really legal. Most people are getting away from that. So there's a lot of little things like that, and just having a lot of stuff written in the lease that needs to be there.
And you glitched out just a second there. You're talking about the security deposits and how basically the city, most people in the city have moved away from the security deposits because of all the new sort of legislation around them.
They're not illegal, but they're so hard to do legally that they might as well just make them illegal at this point. But yeah, it forces landlords to do move-in fees. Otherwise, they're worried about getting sued and losing 3 times the rent and losing 3 months of 4 months of rent just from a
Yeah.
lawsuit of misplacing those or mishandling them.
Because they didn't send the tenant a check for like 2 cents from the interest that was accruing in the security deposit account or whatever it is.
So security deposits, they're not illegal in Chicago, but they might as well be at this point. So, it's so hard to do it right and actually be able to take the funds. And a lot of people look at it as like, oh, I'll pay my interest. I'll put it in the proper bank account and be fine. But the issue becomes when you go and try to collect money from it because they punched a hole in the wall. There's so many rules behind that you can still get sued if they can find a cheaper contractor, or it's a lot of weird things I've seen lawsuits for where landlords are losing. So that's a huge one that makes it landlord friendly in this town. But not tenant friendly in the town, not landlord.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And then I think this covered most of the things that I thought of to ask. Is there anything else? Just any kind of other general advice for people looking to get into small multifamily real estate investing? Anything I should have asked?
I think my big push thing that I'm trying to repeat 100 times or 100 million times to people is just to know your goals. Real estate can eat you alive. It can make you the richest person alive, and it can also make you super poor if it's done wrong. So knowing what your goals are, knowing if you need 100 units to have the life you want, great. But know that means you got to build a team too, whether that's hiring a property manager or building your own team internally that's going to handle those. You're not going to get to the scale level without help to make it passive and to make it worthwhile. And a lot of the big cash outs at the end, 5-10 years down the road, when you're able to cash out and either buy something bigger or just use that money for retirement or whatever, you have to get there. And it's very hard to do so by yourself. So I think just planning your route, planning what the whole goal is. And then, that's probably the biggest thing, and not expecting it to be overnight, I'm going to be rich. This is a 10-year, 20-year play to have money in retirement and to create wealth for your family and your grandkids to have wealth.
Starting with the end in mind, having a long-term outlook on things, delayed gratification, all that stuff. Yep. Awesome.
Exactly.
I agree. Well, Tim, that's all I got, man. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm sure everybody, wherever they are listening or watching this, like I said, I'm not exactly sure where all this is going to be going. It's probably going to be going all kinds of places, but I know wherever they are, they're going to be getting a lot out of this. So appreciate you lending your talents and expertise here.
Sounds good, man. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely.